Try to take it from me. Yeah. Big time. Big time. Big time. Big time. Running up the numbers, that's a lot of crime. Try to take it from me, must be out your mind.
Hey, we want to welcome everyone to today's Lansing People's Assembly. Listen, this is the first time in a year that we have had an in-person meeting. And so I'd like for those that are present to just give everybody online a good hoorah, whatever you want to do. Yeah, and so this is really exciting, and we're excited to have Carol Seaman here with us today, and the folks from Vera, and they're going to introduce themselves. But again, we've been engaged in this process for about a year, and today's conversation is really the beginning of a series that we're going to have around the power of prosecutors. So this is part one in this series, and so we really want you to invite your friends and those to get involved in this process. So again, part one in the community teaching series to explore how prosecution works in Lansing and envision ways to reduce overall incarceration and address racial disparities. We've talked a lot about this over the last year. And so what we'd like to do, as I flip the slide here, is to introduce our sponsors. And so obviously our Liberation PAC, One Love Global, we want to welcome you to the One Love Global space here for transformation and healing. And this is open to the community. And so I think this is our first, our first People's Assembly here in this space. And so again, it's really exciting to be here. We have the Village of Lansing, Black Lives Matter Lansing, our allyship, BLM allyship, as well as TRHT Metro Lansing. And so when you think about all of the work that's happening around the city, we have a tremendous amount of partners that have all linked up for racial equity and justice. And during this presentation today, what we'd like for you all to do is to let's ground ourselves and really think about prosecution across this country, right? We want to contextualize it for today and for Lansing specifically, but I want you to think about and reflect on, Mike Brown and the power that prosecution played in these incidents, right? These murders, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others that have been impacted, right? And so we want to ground ourselves because oftentimes we talk about policy, but people, right? Public, right? Public policy, you put the public back in policy. It's about people. And so I think we need to really just ground ourselves today. And so what I'd like for you all to do is just, I know you might have your phone, but pick a person that you reference throughout this presentation today as we have this first series. Will it be Breonna Taylor? Will it be someone in your family? Anthony Hulan? What, even an incident, right? I want you to just ground yourself in by focusing in on a person or a group of persons. And then think about how you might share this information that's going to be presented today, right? Because there's so much confusion around. We think we know until we sit in a teaching and it's like, oh, okay, right. So we're going to learn a lot today and you're going to have so many thoughts. Now, as we move forward here, we're going to obviously review People's Assembly process, the beloved community, and our priorities. And then we'll jump right into, our family with the Vera Institute and look at have them make their presentation on Prosecution 101, right? And after that, we're going to have Q&A. So on each side of the television, for those of you all that are live, you can, that are in person here, you can write questions down on this whiteboard, right? And if you're with us via Zoom, please feel welcome to put your questions as the folks from Vera are giving the presentation. Put your questions in the comment section so that we can have a running log of those questions. And so I'm going to turn my camera on so you can see me here, or at least a portion of me, right? And so I want to wave at everybody. We do have on with us, we have Sarah Gettle, who's a part of our One Love Global family. Would you like to welcome everyone?
Yes, great to see you all. Thanks for coming.
We also have Angela Waters Austin. Angela, would you like to have something to say? Obviously, we want to introduce you.
Thank you, Mordecai. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Sending you greetings and love, and just grounding us in the importance of this work today. We are airing live on Black Lives Matter Michigan, so shout out to our statewide fam. We wanted to make sure that we bring this entire political education series to everyone who supports BLM across the state, as we envision what a Michigan Breathe Act looks like, as well as a Lansing Breathe Act. So keep this in mind in terms of the context of what are we building and how do we build more just systems that are focused on healing and that actually bring love into solutions. So thank y'all.
Thank you. And again, I mean, think about how powerful it is today for Carol Seaman to be here today, and for us to have this level of transparency and this conversation. So we want to thank you for being partnering with us, as well as being an active participant and member of the TRHT process, right? And so we're grateful to have you today. And I would like to also introduce Jack with the Vera Institute. Jack, would you introduce yourself to everyone?
I would love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Quiles-Nohar. I am a senior program associate with the Vera Institute. I use they, them pronouns, and I am so excited to have been invited into this space, and I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today. Thank you, Mordecai. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carol, for being here. Thank you, Sarah, One Love Global, all y'all. This is super exciting. Thank you.
And I think we have Andrew. He's with us as well. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Andrew Taylor. I'm a quantitative researcher at the Vera Institute. I use he, him pronouns. Means I do everything that's sort of data analysis related for this project. So going forward in the future, I think we'll see a lot more conversation about findings and stuff that we can share. So we get to talk a little bit more in some future presentations. But echoing everything that Jack said, very excited to be with everybody here virtually, at least. Excited to see where we go today.
Yeah. And so, Jack, can you give us like a brief kind of overview? How did Vera get to partner with the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, right? And what does that work look like? Can you kind of give us an overview?
Sure. And when I'm done, I'm also happy to, turn to Carol if she would like to add anything. So my program at the Vera Institute is run by some former prosecutors. I myself am a former prosecutor from the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office in New York City. And there's a program at Vera that's dedicated to trying to figure out a different way to prosecute, essentially. And also more so as a way to reduce the harms that prosecution has historically and continues to cause to Black and Brown communities. So we have a program called Motion for Justice, where we work with prosecutors' offices across the country to talk to them about ways in which they can, really help increase public safety for directly impacted community members. People who are directly impacted by their local prosecutor's office disproportionately. So really trying to center what does public safety really look like for folks, and trying to figure out ways to shrink the criminal justice system so as to help end mass incarceration. And like I said, it increases safety of community members. I think at least from myself and the program perspective, we really work to center the idea that people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and really trying to work with prosecutors to bring them closer to folks who are directly impacted, and figuring out how we can shrink the system, how can we think about power differently within our criminal justice system, and the role and the power that prosecutors have in particular, that could be used in a way that would have less of a, bad impact on communities. So, at least for me, as being a former prosecutor, I've found and support, community-led responses and community-led solutions to what people find that will keep them safe and would best support the healing of communities of people who are survivors of violence. And that includes not only people who are traditionally thought of as, victims of violence, but also understanding that violence is a systemic, institutional thing that has been targeted and directed at Black and Brown communities. So thinking about violence on both an interpersonal level, like within a family or within neighbors, but also understanding that violence can be system-led as well. So, the purpose of our program is to really figure out how to shrink prosecutors' offices so that they cause less harm on communities and help support safety in communities. And in that effort, Carol had reached out to our office a few years ago. I want to say, I know it's like pre-COVID, so it's hard to it feels like longer. But I would say before we got started, I think we've been working with Carol's office for almost a year now. And so we have about 6 months left of working with her office. And excuse me, I'm sorry. So Carol had reached out to our program, really to be able to work with us with understanding that, the racial disparities and the racial impact on the community in Ingham County is particularly, it is a particular issue that really needs to be tackled more head on. So she had reached out to us to work with her office. And the ways in which we work with an office to do this work is, one, we'll work on trying to change the culture inside the office by engaging in deep trainings that go into the history of the creation of the criminal legal system and how it's been created to control Black and Brown communities, and how it's been derived from slavery over time to today into mass incarceration. We also do a deep dive into whatever their data system records about the ways in which they prosecute their cases. And we'll break down that data. And Andrew on our team does a lot of that work as our researcher, where we pull data directly from their data systems to see, who's getting charged the most, what kind of charges are folks facing, what sort of sentencing are folks facing, for example. And that data piece is also not only about us doing a one-time analysis. It is not only about doing a one-time analysis, but it's also about figuring out how to continue to provide this sort of transparency to communities through a continuous sort of data analysis relationship with some local partners who can continue to pull this data, continue to provide this information to the community so that folks know how they're continuing to be impacted. And lastly, towards the end of our work, which is what we're working on now and hoping to bring everyone into the conversation, is what sort of policies need to be implemented that can really get at shrinking the impact that Black and Brown communities are experiencing by the criminal legal system by focusing on policies that the prosecutor herself, Carol, can implement within her office. And so we're kind of inviting you into that conversation through this series that we're going to be doing in partnership with One Love Global. So I think that's one of the reasons, that it is also very exciting for Carol to be here, not only because it's an opportunity for her to hear how people feel, but it's also, an opportunity for bringing together a community and directly impacted folks with the prosecutor's office. And Carol has graciously come and has been involved in even creating this presentation that we're going to give to you today. So I just turned over if anyone else wanted to make any comments.
So I can just real quickly say.
She got you.
Sorry. So I can just real quickly say that, yes, it's been my honor and pleasure to work with Vera. I had first spoken with Angela Waters often back in 2016 when I was running for the first time about the need for data, that we knew there were issues involving, there were serious issues, but we didn't have a way of saying what it looked like anecdotally. I then had the opportunity to meet Nick Turner, who is the director, executive director of the Vera Institute, at a fair and just prosecution convening early in my term. And after that, I basically started begging. And Jamala Hodge, at one point, I'd periodically email and say, pretty please work with me. And, we were a smaller jurisdiction than many of the jurisdictions they're working with. Oh, apparently now you can hear me. A smaller jurisdiction than some of the ones they've worked with. But I think we were showing, because of our partnership with the One Love Global, Truth, Racial Healing, Transformation Kellogg Project, and other issues, that we were really dedicated to doing this. We needed the data. And so eventually, Ms. Hodge reached back out to me and said, guess what? You have a week or so, write this RFP for reshaping prosecution, which has been a longer term project, and it deals with mass incarceration through a race equity lens. But then once we were accepted for that, very quickly they said, would you be part of a brand new project called Motion for Justice? And here we are.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so I think this is important for everyone who's joining us. And we do have some folks that are joining us for the very first time. And so we say welcome. And before we jump into our presentation, we just want to talk about what is the People's Assembly, right? And so the Assembly is multiracial, multi-generational, multi-ideological, and multi-gender. The Assembly brings all voices together in a circular fashion and engages the thinking, experiences, and visions of all the participants in order to synthesize and collectively agree on action steps. So the People's Assembly is not owned by a particular group. And so this is the reason why this is such a powerful gathering that we have once a month. When we look at the People's Assembly, it is a place where everyone can find a home and has a purpose. So again, we're talking about a place where we gather to make decisions and decide on collective action and build collective power. And so the Assembly collectively answers, what are the problems we face? What are the solutions? And what are we, and there's accountability, right? What are we going to do about it? And so we included this. So some of you all maybe want to play the role of facilitator, right? So we have those that are here present in person that have been facilitators. You might want to do the cultural work or help organize or space support or documentation, right? And so again, if any of these interest you, you can put that in the comments section. And we are going to make this presentation available. We are pushing live, so you can go back to the Facebook page, but we want to invite everyone into this space. When we look at the beloved community, what do we want at the end of the day? We said we want the conditions that create crime and violence are no longer present. Number two, the outcomes can no longer be predicted by race, and racial hierarchy is no longer the norm. Everyone feels welcome and everyone feels safe. When we talk about our priorities, we started this process last year. And so we thought it was, like just a roadmap, right? So we didn't arrive at these priorities without, deep thinking and multiple sessions, right? Engaging people across this community. So we started in July of 2020, and we asked, what does safety mean to you, right? And you can go back and listen at those people's assemblies. Like, it was just phenomenal to hear what was coming out of the breakout sessions from across this region. In August, we talked, let's name our priorities. September, what do we need in city leadership? We know that this is an election year, and so we will be electing a new mayor, right? And so what do we need in city leadership? November, considering the BREATHE Act as policy in alignment with our priorities. And then you can see January and February, March, and here we are having our July assembly. So what should crisis response look like in our community? History and imagining civil rights as policy of our future envisioned. And we start talking about what would a Lansing BREATHE Act look like? And people began to sign up to participate and to sponsor, become BREATHE Act co-sponsors, and to really look at the various sections in that particular piece of legislation. And then in May began the Lansing People's budget process. We started talking about a participatory budget process. So that was a whole conversation. And then in June, how would you reallocate city funds in the budget for the upcoming year? So again, we thought it was important to give you kind of like, how do we get here? And then our priorities were clear. And so it was, or they are rather, to fund the police and invest the money in community organizations, ensure livable wages for all to meet basic needs without worry, and 3, divert funds to community programs and mental health, and preventative measures. And we heard the same cry a month ago when the mayor had the Stop the Violence rally at Harry Hill. The same 3 priorities we heard from the community. Many of them had never participated in this process, right? And so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we're gonna jump into our presentation. And so I'm gonna turn it over, Jack, I'm gonna turn it over to you and to lead us in this second phase of our conversation.
Great, thank you, Mordecai. And I'm gonna just quickly share my screen. Let's see, slideshow. Okay, so again, so today is gonna be about the power of prosecutors, and I'm coming at this from the perspective of having been a prosecutor for 4 years in the Domestic Violence Bureau. I worked on misdemeanor and felony cases. I was also one of the few people who spoke Spanish in my office. So I worked with a lot of immigrants. I worked with a lot of, Latina moms, essentially. I also created a specialty for working with folks who are from the LGBTQ community because of the ways in which, heteronormativity is normalized within the law and within the criminal legal system. I found that it was super important to, specialize and have a perspective on that. So I've concentrated my work as a prosecutor, trying to concentrate on the most impacted folks in prosecution or who are prosecuted. So what I'm going to go through today, I guess that's my little introduction about me. I'm going to share some data points about what we know about Ingham County. And Andrew's here to answer if there's any questions. This is just a preview. Then I'll go into what the role of the prosecutor is. And we break that down into 4 major pieces: charging, bail, case processing, which is, talking about plea deals and evidence and discovery, and then sentencing. In between each of these pieces, where I talk about charging, bail, each of those, we're going to have a pause for questions and a pause to breathe. This information, as you can only imagine, is incredibly heavy. It could be very dense, and I'm doing the very best I can to make this as relatable as possible, as clear as possible. So that's why, questions in the chat are super important. But I also want to acknowledge that some of this information is really hard. And it's really, it really, at least for me, as I was working in the prosecutor's office, I'm not going to lie, it was hard to not get angry. For me, as a brown, queer, non-binary person, I've dealt with my own stuff between, whatever in my life, right? So I just want to make space if folks feel like they need to get up, walk around, tune out, like Mordecai said, like this is being recorded, so you can always refer back, but please take care of yourself during this time. And there will be moments throughout this with reminders to breathe. And the reminders are for both of us, for me to breathe and for you to breathe, so you can breathe together. So here's our first one. Let's take a deep breath as we prepare ourselves for this information. Breathe out. And here we go. We'll start with a video talking a little bit of a summary of what the role of the prosecutor is. And I'm going to pause because I realize you may not be able to hear my sound. So let me make sure I'm sharing my sound. All right, let's try this again.
The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We are addicted to locking people up. Despite having only 5% of the world's population, the US has 25% of the world's prisoners. The land of the free, it seems, is anything but. While we have been building a national consciousness around the causes of mass incarceration, little attention has been paid to one of the system's most powerful actors, prosecutors. A prosecutor, also known as a district attorney, represents the government in criminal proceedings against any person accused of a crime. They are actually referred to as the people because they are supposed to represent the interests of the community. Their job is to seek justice, not convictions. And prosecutors have more power than most of us realize. Prosecutors alone decide whether or not to charge a crime. They get to decide who is prosecuted and who gets a pass. They also decide what crimes to charge you with. This is important because the more serious the charge, the greater the risk a person faces by taking their case to trial. This increased risk puts pressure on a person to give up their rights and take a deal, even if they are innocent. And despite their legal duty to turn over evidence that could prove you are innocent, prosecutors themselves, all in secret, decide when to apply that rule. Given all their discretionary power, prosecutors ultimately determine how the system treats the most vulnerable people in our communities. But the problem is not just the unfair amount of power prosecutors have. The problem is the abuse of that power, which is unfortunately all around us. Investigative reporter Radley Balco explains that one of the most powerful positions in public service, a position that carries with it the authority not only to ruin lives, but in many cases, the power to end them, is one of the positions most shielded from liability and accountability. And he's right. Over 40 years ago, the Supreme Court gave prosecutors absolute immunity, a powerful legal protection that is even greater than the protection the law gives to police officers. Absolute immunity is a big deal, a really big deal. And it means that in our current legal system, who we elect to represent the people becomes even more critical. Here's what you can do. Find out who the elected district attorney is in your jurisdiction. Get to know where they stand on the issues you care about most. Make sure you know what policies and practices are implemented in your name every day. Hold prosecutors accountable with the power of your vote. It's time to ask whether your district attorney is standing up for the needs and values of the communities they serve. So, do prosecutors exercise significant power? Absolutely. But they can only exercise the power that you give them. And that starts with winning an election, which means the most powerful player in our system is really the voter. That's you.
All right, sorry for the little mix up with those slides. So what we know about, and there's more data than this, but from what we know already, based on some of our preliminary data analysis, is that Black folks in Lansing are almost 2 times more likely to get stopped by the police than white folks, right? And once they are stopped, Black folks in Lansing are 3 times more likely to be searched, despite not being any more likely to have contraband or weapons. In Ingham County, the police send their cases to the prosecutor's office or send information about the arrest to the prosecutor's office, asking about, charges to be issued, okay? Black folks and low-income people are more likely to be referred from the police to the office more likely than white folks and high income people. So we got 5 times more likely if you're Black, 1.7 times more likely if you're low income. And if you're both, I believe that that might just be a multiplier. And Andrew's our data person, so he would probably know for sure, but we can only imagine that that's confounded, right? And we know that Black folks are more likely, oh, I repeated the previous one, I'm sorry. 5 times more likely than white folks to have their case, have an arrest sent to the prosecutor's office for charges. Lastly, of charges, of cases that the police send to the prosecutor's office, Black folks are 14 times, a little over 14 times more likely than white folks to be arrested for and charged in a case where the most serious offense is weapons related. And remember, weapon is a broader umbrella term. And that doesn't necessarily only mean a gun, right? That could mean a knife, for example. But of those cases, 90% of weapons cases are related to firearm possession. And current estimates suggest that Black folks were more likely than white folks to be charged with a weapons offense when they are stopped for a traffic stop or stopped on the street. Now you will get copies of this. This is not going to be the last time you see these statistics, okay? So I'm just gonna pull up the map. Give me 1 second, I just have to change screens. Make sure you can see this. Can we see the screen? Let me do a new share. All right, so here we have a map, Ingham County, and we can zoom in, I will in a second. I just want to point out, this is a map of the total caseload that the prosecutor's office has and where those cases correspond to within Ingham County. The darker color is more cases, the lighter the color, the less cases. So it's on a little scale. Up here in the corner, we have Lansing. And I'm going to zoom in. So here, I'll start from the top. You can zoom in here. I'm not going to zoom in all the way, because if I zoom in too much, it could give individualized information, which we certainly don't want to do, because that could reveal, information particular to an individual. When this information does become public, obviously we will anonymize everything so that it's, you can't figure out who it is, but this is a tool that we're using internally and we're using within the office to understand the impact. So for now, I'm not going to zoom in too much because we haven't made that extra layer of anonymity and protection, but there will be. So here you can see that there's more cases, and I think I can zoom in a little bit more in this top corner for y'all. You can see where the most cases are coming from, even broken down a little bit more, okay? Here. So so this is probably, and I'm curious about whether or not and how this relates to folks' individual experiences. And I'll move down to some of the bottom half so you can see a little bit more. I'm going to zoom out actually because it's too few over there. It looks like we have a little segment in the middle, okay? Zoom out. I thought that this visual might be more helpful than trying to give you a breakdown by zip codes. So I'm going to go back to my previous screen. 1 second.
Jeff, we're taking notes on the screen that you just popped up. We're taking notes on the dark red. And
Okay, do you want me to go back?
no, we're just taking notes on that. I know that a lot of people wanted to know exactly what particular area was that dark red. I'm pretty sure people are.
Okay, I can pull it up one more time if that's helpful. So here, I'll zoom in on this dark red up here. You can even zoom in a little bit more. I don't really, actually, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because that was too specific. So this is that dark red area. We have some East Lansing over here that you can see in Lansing.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to.
The county line is at Waverly Road. So there's a nice square box that shows Ingham County, but Lansing actually is the Delta Township. But so it's not, you know, this is our data, but it's going to be more complex than that when we're really looking at how.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to, it is specific to Carol's data, right? So this is different than the city attorneys. This is different than anything else. This is only about Carol's office. So there is certainly more information to find out about how the city attorney is impacting people's experience, where those cases are located. So that is not included here.
That's good.
MSU, we prosecute MSU ordinances, so that would be included, but we don't prosecute like Meridian Township ordinances, City of East Lansing ordinances, Lansing City ordinances. Unless they also fall under state law or they're a felony where only we have the jurisdiction. So this data is probably going to be pretty darn slow when you look at what the arrests are for persons that go charged or submitted to the Lansing City Attorney's Office too. But we don't give them that.
So I'm going to just do breathe and reflect. It seems like that's what we were doing. And again, we're going to be having another presentation that's going to go into that data, but I wanted to ground us a little bit and give us a good perspective on where we're going to go now. Okay. Because I'm also want to give time for more discussion. So like I said, we're going to break this down into charging and diversion, bail, then the case process, meaning discovery and pleas, and I'll define that, and then sentencing. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to walk through a hypothetical. So we have Raja, who's a 26-year-old. He lives with his mother. He pushes his mother, who's an older woman. During an argument, she falls, fractures her hip. Raja leaves. Neighbor hears the mom, calls the police. Police find Raja hiding a few blocks away. They arrest him and take him into custody. The mother has to go to the hospital, and she does get released with instructions for bed rest for a couple of weeks. So we have that crime is some sort of assault and it's a domestic violence incident, right? Because it's child against their parent. Even I'm saying child is a 26-year-old person against their mother. These are cases that I've seen. I think these are cases that a lot of people have seen, whether they get reported or not, right? Criminal history that Raja has is that they have theft for stealing beer from a 7-Eleven. That's it. So what do we do? At charging, right? After the police make an arrest, they bring a warrant request to the prosecutor's office. The warrant request says, hey, these are the charges that I arrested this person for. Here's all my paperwork. And I'm submitting that to you, prosecutor, for you to decide, to authorize these charges. But the prosecutor has the decision to authorize those charges, not authorize any of the charges, right? And decline the whole case. They could authorize other charges that aren't what the police had asked for, or they can maybe charge one thing and then try to like, you know, offer something else to divert the program, to divert the case. And we'll talk about that in a second in the next piece. But just talking about what charges get approved. How does a prosecutor determine what charges we're going to approve? Well, before they decide what charges to approve, we're thinking whether or not should we file charges. And prosecutor's office is going to look at the criminal history. They're going to review all the police paperwork. If there's body cams, and I'm saying this a little bit more generally, these are the factors that the office does consider. Whether or not certain evidence is available at the time of charging does make this a little challenging, right? You don't always have body cam right away. You may not always have surveillance footage right away. Another thing that, you know, prosecutors do when they get, especially a case like this, you want to call the victim, find out how they feel about it. But the prosecutor, again, has the charging decision. So it doesn't matter if the victim doesn't want to press charges. The prosecutor has the ultimate decision as to what they're going to do. And whether or not there's diversionary alternatives. For a domestic violence case where there was an assault, there aren't really going to be any sort of diversionary options, especially at this point, that would avoid somebody having a criminal case. There are other sort of cases, there are other sort of charges that could help somebody avoid having a criminal case. Domestic violence is not one of them. We'll get into that too. Then, what charges to file? So if they decide that they are going to go forward on this, what charges do they file? They look again at the criminal history. They look at what the law says, what the statute is. And I remember sitting there with my big book and like flipping through and like literally having to read criminal statutes to see exactly what matches the facts. And also evaluating the strength of the evidence. So an important distinction is that different prosecutors across the country have different standards of how much evidence they need to have from the jump to decide what charges they're going to charge. So, for example, even everybody has heard about the standard called beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Everyone's heard about that. That's for a conviction. That's for whether or not, you know, a prosecutor has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury over whether or not they, you know, whether or not that, right? Not most prosecutors do not use that same standard when evaluating whether to charge. So I think that's important for folks to know. Prosecutors can evaluate whether or not to charge based on anything from probable cause, which is the information that a police officer would need, which is just somebody saying that somebody did something, right? It's based on the testimony of someone maybe, all the way to maybe a little bit more than probable cause, like maybe it was like a little bit more likely that it happened, to all the way to beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what do these standards mean, right? It's like, so like theoretical, like what does that actually look like in real life? Again, that depends on the prosecutor, right? So for beyond a reasonable doubt, I think that there's like actually a lot of discussion around like what does beyond a reasonable doubt really mean, and like there's a really good, you know, I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Dave Chappelle, but there's like a really good Dave Chappelle episode that goes into like all of this, like what does beyond a reasonable doubt really mean? Who's the reasonable person? What is considered reasonable? And that's a whole conversation. But I just say that to say different prosecutors use different standards. And so the most stringent standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, which would mean that prosecutors are really evaluating everything that they could possibly have in the beginning to see, do we have, you know, evidence, clear-cut evidence for every single thing that we're accusing this person of doing, essentially. Another piece that is important to understand is that whether or not to believe someone and what they say happened, and that someone includes cops, right? Whether or not to believe someone legally is a decision that by law is supposed to be left to a jury. It's not supposed to be an evaluation that a prosecutor makes at charging, just the way the legal system defines it. But we all know that credibility decisions are absolutely made at charging because you're choosing to believe what the person is saying that the person is accused of doing, right? So this legal farce that credibility is never thought about until a jury is just a way that sometimes people just like get stuff in and say, well, you know, even though I don't believe this officer, that's not up to me to decide. That's something that gets determined later. And that's something that I often heard when I was a prosecutor. And when I would have to be making decisions on charging. Whereas I would say, this officer is clearly lying, right? Like we should not be taking into account what this officer is saying right now. So that is something that is a legal standard over whether or not to believe somebody at charging. What does that look like? So prosecutors are pushing back, different prosecutors are pushing back around this credibility determination at charging, especially when it comes to cops, by requiring cops to provide more information. Their dash cam videos, their body cam videos, surveillance video, if it exists. Again, talking to witnesses and seeing what supports what this cop is saying, especially in cases of, right, resisting arrest, assault on an officer, or even basic like officer stopping somebody in the car for I don't know, they didn't blink. They didn't like turn on their turning signal, making a left turn or something. How are we going to ever know if that actually happened or not? We have to decide whether or not we want to believe the cop for that. And so that is what comes in at this point. Legally, it's not required to review credibility, but obviously, if you're making a legal decision to not evaluate credibility, that means you are making the decision to always believe. And so that is an area that different prosecutors fall on differently. I will say that Carol does have policies that she is working on to also narrow that sort of credibility determination, especially when it's based on just what the police officer might be saying or information available to the police officer. So having policies to require what's called corroboration or confirming sort of evidence that's consistent is a way to cut back on that bias that might already be there to believe an officer when they say something happened. So in this case, what would they do? Prosecutor calls mom. Mom says she wants her son to get help, but doesn't want to press charges. And this happened all the time. So what does a prosecutor do? They can decline the case if they want to. In Ingham County, they will not be able to divert this case because it's an assaultive crime, which I will get into, meaning it's a victim crime. And so there aren't that many diversion options when it's an assault-based crime by law. In Ingham County, actually, I believe it's a state law, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, that says that you cannot divert victim cases.
Now, we don't have any law about diversion. Ingham County has a diversion program since the 1970s, but it tends to be property offenses. It used to be marijuana offenses, a lot of retail fraud. We don't divert individuals currently who have domestic violence or other kinds of assault offenses. There's no state law that talks about it.
Okay, so it was a policy. I stand corrected, but I knew that there was a limit on the issue with the assaultive crimes. Thank you for that, Carol. All right, and then whether to charge a misdemeanor or a felony. And I'll just say for a case like this, right, a prosecutor could decide to charge a misdemeanor because they're like, I know that mom doesn't want, him to have any charges, doesn't want him to have to go to jail or anything like that. But the mom does want him to have help. And we do have the criminal records And we do have a neighbor that called 911, and, you know, we do have some other stuff. So maybe we can get this person to plead guilty to a misdemeanor so that we can get them into a program, right? That's the thinking a lot of times that prosecutors will have. They'll say, oh, well, looking at this situation, looks like this guy, you know, the only way that we can get this person help through the prosecutor's office is by charging this person with a crime. In this particular case. So we're going to charge the misdemeanor and offer for this person to go into, I don't know if there's a drug issue, a drug court, or if there's a drug issue, maybe some drug counseling. If there's, you know, maybe there's a anger management situation, maybe there's, you know, some sort of program this person can do. I apologize if you hear noise in the background. My neighbors are having a great time. The weather is like gorgeous outside right now, and they have a backyard. So my neighbors are having a good time. I can't do anything about it. So they can do that. However, the case is stronger if mom did want to press charges. So if mom wanted to press charges and they have the criminal records, and let's say, I mean, the medical records, and say that mom's injury was actually really bad, and maybe mom is of a certain age. And this happened a lot for us, where mom is old enough that by statute, it actually would be considered a felony to assault somebody over a certain age if they get a certain type of injury. And so if mom were cooperative, meaning if mom wanted to press charges, prosecutors call them cooperative. I apologize for using that word. I don't think it's necessarily fair, but then an office would maybe want to charge a felony, right? Because they're looking at it from, they have a strong case. So what would happen here? Let's just say that Raja gets charged with a felony. And so here we're gonna breathe and reflect, and I'll check the chat really quick if there's any particular questions about the charging part.
Hey, Jack, what I'd like to do also, we'd like to get some reactions. Like, what are people feeling? What did you hear, right? And so let's start with those that are online. You're in Zoom. Who'd like to just share some brief reflections on just this first part? What are you hearing? What are some of your takeaways?
Yeah, so something was mentioned earlier, Kara, I heard this earlier. True. So I can talk more. Yes. All right, so earlier there was something on one of the parties, and I heard Carol whispering, "That's not true." And then another one you said, like, that's further down the line. So I want clarification.
Oh, golly, I'm such a reactive person. Jack knows that, right? Everyone knows that I tend to have strong opinions. So, you know, everything Jack said is accurate. It's a whole range of ways prosecutors can do cases. So the two things I think that Carrington is referring to is one, quite a bit about the criminal history. That's not a person. When we're looking at something like domestic violence, that we look at it, but that's not criteria. That would be like if we're referring to a case of diversion or making a decision about a felony or misdemeanor. It's not, it's put at the top, but that may have been one of the things where I was reacting. The other one is domestic violence is a great example to use because it is a real different kind of case than some of the ones you think about stealing something or breaking a building. Because we really are trying to reflect the victim and what draws for the whole community. So there are times in cases that involve certain kinds of victimization, like a child sexual assault or domestic violence, but we have enough case to move forward. But we ultimately, ethically, this is my firm belief, in Ingham County, believe we have to be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So when we take it to the jury, we have to believe that we have that. Not that the jury will convict, we have evidence that a reasonable jury could convict. But the standards are a little different in different stages. So for example, to bind over a felony to circuit court, it requires that we prove that a crime was committed and the person probably committed it. So it's a lower standard. And there are times when we don't know exactly what's going to come down on a case. There's more investigation coming down, more information. So we may go ahead and issue when we really are issuing on a little lower standard at that point, but ultimately down the road we'd have to dismiss it. And actions.
Yeah.
That's okay.
No, you need to talk to them.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if that lower standard is preponderance of the evidence, because I know that's like a thing in sexual relationship violence cases, like the FSU, for example, is that low standard?
Well, beyond a reasonable, I'm sorry, preponderance of the evidence is a lower standard than a legal standard. So for example, on some civil cases, and I think for the Office of Institutional Equity and some of the findings, that would be a civil burden of proof. That's about like 51% more evidence than not, preponderance of the evidence. In some cases, we have there are standards called clear and convincing, which is about 75% of the evidence, and then beyond reasonable doubt is 9 or something. We never have, it's a hard thing to explain because you know when you see it maybe. There's something called probable cause that Jack alluded to. Probable cause really is the standard at which the police would make an arrest or that a case would come. It's really low. I mean, probably there's reasonable, I mean, Jack, maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about this or if this goes into the weeds too much, but there's reasonable suspicion, there's probable cause. These are all reasons to even move a little step further. You can't just stop, you're not supposed to, you can't legally just stop someone on the street because or something. Because there's no, that violates their constitutional protection. So every time you move a little deeper into what's that?
That sounds nice in theory.
Yes, it does. Carrington said it sounds nice in theory.
I have one request too. Can we step away from legalese?
We're talking. Okay, tell me what you need to know, because if we're talking about prosecution, there's a whole lot of legalese.
So legalese, everybody knows it's like, probably noticed the jargon in which lawyers talk. There's all these standards and cases and stuff like that. Like, I understand what beyond a reasonable doubt is, but I don't understand how this applies directly to a situation. Also, with that said, I have a second question. You said discretion, right? You said something about discretion earlier. And I just want to make sure it's clear that you said it's not a law by the state of Michigan that prosecutors have the ability to use their discretion. It's more of a policy practice.
Okay, no, that was about diversion.
Oh, diversion.
But diversion doesn't exist. I mean, there are certain things that reference diversion in the law, like police have certain diversionary authority, like with juveniles, they can divert them to vocational or they have for juveniles instead of referring to court. Diversion, as our diversion program was created in our office back in 1975 or so, and so it exists. You know, it's something we do. When it comes to discretion, prosecutors across the United States have, that's what's so powerful, and that's why Jack refers to how much power. It's our discretion whether to charge a case, not charge, charge a misdemeanor or felony. We apply the law, but we're not obliged to charge, and we can not charge, usually for reasons that we think are like they're going to be diverted or a warning letter or something like that. But it's incredible amounts of discretion.
So,
I mean, we got a ton of questions. What's coming in the comment section, Sarah? Do we have?
Well, first of all, I wanted to check if the speaker is right by the computer. The audio is coming through pretty poppy, so it's a little hard to hear the responses. So if there are any adjustments that could be made, that would be helpful. I do have a handful of questions that I can share as well. Hopefully they're not repeating what has already been said. I just can't quite hear everything, but I'm happy to share those. So one of the things that was actually answered in the chat that I just want to raise for folks in the room is someone had asked when the map was up earlier whether it was showing raw numbers or per capita, since population varies from area to area. And Andrew, who's on the Vera team, helped answer that and said the numbers in the dots represent cases as raw numbers. So the dark red shading reflects median household income in these census tracts. And while most cases are concentrated around most of the population, the per capita rates are also highest in these areas. And then he offered to provide more specific numbers offline if that's of interest. But I also want to just let folks know we're going to be going into this even more for this second session of this series. So we'll do some more population specific data, such as race and neighborhood, and we'll spend more time getting into that. But another question that is still open from someone online is, how is the Ingham County office dealing with the backlash from police because of the recent changes concerning police stops? That'll be great, Carol, thanks.
Okay, so does this better?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Okay, so I've been asked that question a lot in the last few days. And the answer is, you know, I've been talking with the police. I go to the monthly police chiefs meetings, which are held out at the, well, now we're just starting them live again. And so I've been talking with them about, you know, driving while license suspended, you know, not arresting, a lot of policies. And you may recall a year ago, I put in place saying we're going to have a heightened scrutiny for resisting and obstructing police officer cases after a couple bad cases out of East Lansing, that we just didn't want to see those kinds of things anymore. So, you know, my feeling is I share the information with the police. I ask them for, you know, can they share me information about good policies, maybe from the PERF or the International Chiefs of Police. I didn't get any responses, but this discussion has actually been ongoing for the past year or more. And so, you know, they come from a certain perspective, and it's very hard, I think, for many of us to change, and for police, it's very hard for them to change. So my feeling is we're not waiting for them to change. That's why I put this policy in place. It's how we're going to review the cases that come to us. We can't tell the police what to do, but we can say what we're going to do with it when we get it. And that's my right. And, you know, that's what we're going to do. And it's not done with, you know, I knew they're going to disapprove, and I'll continue to listen to them, and I'll make any changes that are needed as we see how the policy actually plays out.
Thanks, Carol. Do we have time for one or two more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What part of the city are most stops made? And is there a time of day or night when most stops are made?
That would be Andrew. Can Andrew or Jack answer that question from the data?
It's going to be tricky, but I'm going to ask Andrew if he can answer this one.
Yeah, I can give sort of an unsatisfying answer, which I think is that if we look at where most cases are referred from, and this isn't from the police's data, it's from the data that Carol provided us from the office, it looks like the majority of them come from around Lansing and like, you know, well within the area where most of the population is concentrated. It's kind of unsatisfying. I couldn't exactly tell you the time. You may be able to get some of that information from some open data provided by the police, but I'd have to look. I don't want to promise it before we check that.
It's fair to say that the location that we're at right now would be one of those areas, that any place in South Lansing, especially bounded by Waverly, Jolly, Cedar, and all through MLK. This is all, I'm sure right here is where a lot of that is concentrated.
Yeah, I would say it certainly looks like that on the map. And we can provide, if there's really interest in like a more specific space for neighborhoods or zip codes, it's something we can look into aggregating in the future, possibly for the next time we come back.
I just had a question about sort of the relationship between the police and the prosecutor's office in terms of their response to things shared with your recent policy changes and stuff. So like, you don't have the recourse to be able to dictate to the police whether or not to pull people over for these types of things, reasonable searches. But what your policy changes is that if you are charged or brought to your office, then if in the description of the case or whatever it says, you know, that paraphernalia was found because they had a taillight that was out, you're going to decline to charge them. So it's you can't really, like, the police can say like, well, because I think of Ukraine had the policy, right, where like they were going to do the same thing. They're like, oh, this is great, whatever. And they're like, yeah, so we decreased it by 50%. And I'm like, wasn't the policy? Like, did we just not pull it over all the way people and then it was the same, or like what did, so I would love to think that this means that like people actually get pulled over less and like contact with the police is needed. I think that's your intent, but I'm trying to understand the relationship and where your control is.
Well, in some jurisdictions, well, one, I think of New Jersey, where the Attorney General in New Jersey actually has authority over prosecutors and police officers. That is not true in Michigan. I'm a county prosecutor. I'm elected by the people. The AG doesn't have control. Similarly, I have no control over the individual police agencies. I'm not their boss. The sheriff's elected. The others are appointed by, they're usually their city council or township board. So not every police agency was represented at that press conference. I'd ask you to keep that in mind. I've had lots of conversations with law enforcement who are more open and are saying, we're going to look at this and, you know, so I think it's going to change practice. But I can only use the tools I have. And while, like as Jack said, the prosecutor is an incredibly powerful person in the system. I don't initiate cases. I don't have investigators. I have to wait for the police to bring a case to me, nor do I dictate what happens once it goes to the judge and like for a sentencing. So we're very powerful in the arena we have. And that's why I'm trying to use the place I can impact the most. So for example, one of the chiefs mentioned, why don't you do legislation to change things, you know? And I said, well, legislation's great, but I'm not a legislator, you know? So I do work on trying to change legislation, but I'm a prosecutor. So that's where my power is. And that's where I'm choosing, you know, that's where I can use it. And it does change practice. It's like, you know, if you start changing something in a school or wherever it is, practice will start changing over time. And that's what I'm hoping will happen here.
So let's turn it back over to Jack for the next portion. I mean, we've got 1,000 different questions here. But let's go to the second part, right? And because we are now at 3:15, and so I know they're gonna continue to have questions. So Jack, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and I will say that each one of these sessions, like each one of these pieces that I'm going to take you through, can be an entire conversation on its own. And so I just, you know, I encourage you to, and like I said, we'll be sharing this information, but I encourage you to continue to engage with these questions over how and what the relationship between the police and prosecutors are, for example. There are some, I can't even say that I know of any studies, but just anecdotally, when prosecutors say, we are not prosecuting X, if you give it to us, police, there's a theory that if you say that to the police, then they will stop doing those arrests. But I think that, you know, that's something that still needs to be explored. So this next piece is about diversion. And I was going to play this little video just describing an example of diversion.
We as prosecutors have to undo the harm that we've caused to create mass incarceration. We've been tough on crime. What is our return?
People think of the police as the ones who bring people into the system. A lot of people don't recognize that prosecutors can stop criminal justice involvement at the moment of arrest. It is their decision and their decision alone, whether or not to charge someone, whether or not that case will move forward at all, or whether any system involvement can stop right there.
Going to jail, going to jail, going to jail. Getting out, going to jail, going to jail, going to jail. It's the same cycle. And eventually, if I'm constantly going to jail, my son gonna go to jail.
We can't arrest our way out of the problem. We're not going to incarcerate our way out of the problem. Those things have been shown to be ineffective, empirically. We know. You get discussions around criminal justice reform now, and they are bipartisan discussions. People on both sides of the aisle understand the system is broken. That's not even up for legitimate debate.
Defendants were once victims. It's a cycle. They need therapists. Like they need to sit down, talk talk to somebody because they've been through trauma. One way to break the cycle is just by getting them the help they need. Somebody does, community service, they take anger management class, they meet with a therapist, they do everything we ask, we dismiss their case. It's a full circle way to just give people a second chance.
Public safety is our first priority. We put resources in place for the people who get accepted into the program for them to be successful, whether that's employment, you need a GED, you may need some kind of counseling, drug counseling, anger management. There's any number of support resources we put in place for you to be successful.
What I do inside the diversion program is I actually show these kids and search for their why. So what we do is a constantly 24/7 mentoring service that I actually provide to go get them to be a better person. If I got resources to get them a job, I put them on the right track.
I was required to do community service and stay out of trouble. The whole thing is that they're giving me an extra chance and change my future, and I shouldn't be doing anything to jeopardize that. You have to work for it, you gotta pay attention, and that's what the program really instilled in me, to be responsible. I'm gonna be helping out whatever I can. I just want that same opportunity for the next person. Just gotta know that somebody cares and somebody want better for you. Just like I want better for my son or my siblings. Just makes me wanna give back.
Right now, I'm currently a TIG welder. I went to school for it back then, but I got off track. The program motivated me to get back into that. I met Mr. Sid telling me like, man, the path you going down, it ain't a good road for you. I ain't want to listen. He had me a lot, like understand a lot. Sometimes I ain't have gas. He'll come pick me up. I ain't think that, where I come from, somebody do something like that for me.
The system is not serving not just those who are accused and brought into it, but victims who've suffered harm and who need something better than what we offer to create safety and wholeness in ways that the system does not.
Kids do not belong in jail. They need to have a chance.
It's a program meant to give people a second chance. So if a person has a bad day, they don't necessarily get thrown away in jail for the rest of their life, and instead are able to have a second chance to try to contribute to society and live a nice life.
If you believe that a person can change, it's the right thing to do to give that person an alternative.
It's a concept where you get to the root causes of why this individual is doing the things they're doing. So you address the harm by giving them the resources to address the PTSD that's causing that individual to be hypervigilant. It is addressing the economic issues in terms of why this person is breaking into cars because they're trying to support their family or they have lack of food. It's addressing this crisis that I see. We give people resources after we lock them up. We need to move that before we lock them up, and we can reduce crime.
The prison system is now the biggest provider of mental health treatment in the country. It's extremely expensive to keep people in those institutions. They don't always get the proper treatment that they need, especially mental health clients and people with substance abuse problems. We want to get people out of those systems so that we don't have the overcrowding and the expense of housing them in institutions when they can be productive citizens out in the world.
As a matter of political currency, it's always good to talk tough on crime, but what really works in a community that's trying to rebuild itself and change lives and change the direction of a community is something like diversion. We've seen the impact in individual lives that necessarily affects more than just that individual life. It's families associated with that individual, it's the children of that individual. When they successfully complete the program and have that case dropped, it clears a major hurdle for them relative to employment, housing, education, depending on which institution they're applying to. It makes a major difference in the kinds of choices that are available to an individual once they successfully complete this program.
So one thing I do want to say in that video, so St. Louis is one of the areas that we work, the Vera Institute works with the local prosecutor. Kim Garner, she was the first Black woman elected in St. Louis as prosecutor. One of the things I do just want to say is that in the video, they said that, they believe that the system is broken. And I just feel a need to correct that. I don't believe the system is broken. I believe that the system is working exactly the way that it was intended to. And that is why we have to arm ourselves with the information that we need to help shrink it. So diversion is a way to send people away from a traditional path, right? In Ingham County, the office's diversion programs are for non-assaultive crimes only. So you have for drug possession, trespassing, or property damage. Whether or not you are offered diversion can be dependent on criminal history. That is not true for all. What the criminal history looks like could be an office policy, right? That's why it's like dependent on what the criminal history is. And I will say a huge barrier to a lot of people across the country for getting access to diversion is which crimes qualify for diversion and what criminal history, or the fact that criminal history is even considered in offering somebody diversion. That was an issue a lot in my own cases, wanting to figure out an alternative for somebody and them not qualifying because they have certain, violent crimes on their record, for example, even if they were old. Diversion can still include costs. You may still have restitution to pay if it's property damage. If you have to do an anger management course, those anger management courses oftentimes cost money. And not all insurance plans will cover it. There can also be fines and fees. As you may know, when you plead guilty to a certain type of crime, if the diversion depends on you pleading guilty, not all of them do, you may have to pay, a court fee. There could be fees associated with this. I remember when we had just, for example, a program can cost hundreds of dollars. I had a program that we used to refer folks to. It was a batterers intervention program for domestic violence cases. They had to pay out of pocket $300 or show up. I think it was like $20 a session, something like that. It's a lot of money for people. So there's a few different ways diversion could work. It can be, we're not going to press any charges, just go straight to, like, prosecutor's not going to press any charges, go straight to program, and the court's going to monitor the program. If you don't do, if you don't have certain positive updates, if you're not paying what you need to be paying, if you're not showing up the way you need to show up, the court can still issue a warrant for you to be arrested. So there are still some punitive sort of ways in which the system is going to view you, even in a pre-charge situation, even if you're avoiding a criminal case. Yes, but like a prosecutor and a court could technically have the power to still issue a warrant if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, essentially. There's also the option for a post-charge diversion, meaning you have to plead guilty to the crime that you committed or alleged to have committed up front right away. But if you do the program and there aren't any issues, then that initial thing that you pled guilty to could be dismissed from your record. It can be changed so that it's a non-public record, something you can get some type of benefit at the end. And again, you can imagine that some people would take that as an option. It all kind of depends. But that can still be even while you're doing the program, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you don't show up the way you're supposed to show up, and I'm framing it this way, and I'm saying it this way because I'm saying it from the perspective of the court, then there can still be a warrant issued. You may not get the benefit of the dismissal or the change on your criminal record at the end if you don't successfully complete it. You could also be facing jail time if what you pled guilty to could carry a jail sentence if you don't complete a program. So for a lot of people, the experience of diversion can still be very onerous. The best sort of diversion would be pre-charge, meaning that you don't ever have to deal with the criminal case. And then all you have is like then you have the warrant possible situation if you don't abide by the program the way you're supposed to, from the perspective of the court. But there there are other ways in which different prosecutors across the country are trying to figure out a way that diversion can still be less punitive, less onerous, and cheaper, and maybe not cost people money. So I just included the Resolution Services Center on here because that's, you know, where the office diversion kind of runs through. Now, whether or not somebody gets a program is different than if a case is getting treated a certain different way. And so I'll give an example. In Michigan, you have the Homes Youthful Training Act. If somebody gets arrested and they're between the ages of 17 and 20, and Carol, I checked this and read the statute just in time to make sure I'm giving folks the right age range. You are likely, or you're going to be charged as an adult. However, you can ask the court, hey, I'm young, right? I'm 18 years old or something like that. And I maybe don't have criminal history, whatever. I want you to treat me slightly differently than you would as an adult. Meaning I wanted, you know, maybe I could have different sentence, you know, maybe I could, you know, my case will be private from the public, right? Because we're concerned about the privacy of young folks. So your case can be maybe done in a closed courtroom with more discretion so people don't find out. And then if you get convicted under this statute, it becomes a non-public record, which means that it's kind of hidden, but it's not fully hidden because a prosecutor's office and the police would likely still be able to see it. Now, if you're between 21 and 24, and you want to ask for that same sort of status where it's like, hey, you know, even though I'm technically an adult under the law, I'm really asking that you try to treat me more as a juvenile. I don't have this record, et cetera, et cetera. You would need the permission of the prosecutor at that point to be treated as differently than as just an adult. And so that's another way in which prosecutor discretion will come in. Now, starting October, if you're 17, you will still be treated as a juvenile. But this option then for 18 to 20 would still apply if somebody's 18, 19, 20 years old. They'd still be able to ask the court, yo, you know, consider me a little bit different and, you know, make this non-public. Another, it's under the umbrella of diversion, but it's not necessarily diversion, is that there are specialty courts. So when people have cases, they got to show up to a certain courtroom. There are certain specialty courts. There are different courtrooms in a courthouse. And so there are particular courtrooms that handle, for example, domestic violence. The domestic violence courtroom is not necessarily anything particularly, I used to appear in domestic violence. The only difference is that you have a judge more familiar with maybe, you know, a batterer's intervention program, which is just a domestic violence type of alternative to jail type of program that is offered. So you just have more people familiar with domestic violence, and all of the domestic violence cases go to that court. It doesn't mean that you're going to be treated any easier. And another option for diversion that I explained is you can, like I said, plead guilty to a crime and agree to do an anger management program, for example. And if you're successful, you can either get a non-public record or you can get your case dismissed. Those are two very different things. A non-public record would still be able to be seen by a prosecutor or police. If it's dismissed, it's supposed to be just dismissed as though it never existed. And I will say, at least in my experience in Brooklyn, that wasn't even necessarily true, because if you had certain security permissions or whatever, you're able to go into the system and find out what cases have been dismissed against you anyway. So there's still a record somewhere, at least in New York. But that's another option for diversion is, hey, I'll plead guilty, but give me this, program, and I'll do it successfully. The understanding you'll dismiss it or do something different at the end. But again, you don't do that program the way that the court wants you to. If you don't show up, things like that, you could be left with that criminal record and you could be sentenced according to whatever it was that you pled guilty to, which could still include jail sentence. One thing I forgot to mention is that you, in the first option for youth, for example, even if you get the Homes Youthful Training Act, even if you get those benefits, even if you get treated that way in the courts because you're arguing, yo, I'm a little bit younger, blah, 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 you could still be facing jail time. That doesn't mean you're not going to be facing jail time. So some other diversion options that you got to see the video for are also restorative justice programs. You can refer folks to community-based alternative programs. So in my jurisdiction, when I was in Brooklyn, for example, I worked on domestic violence for LGBTQ folks. The court offered programs that also required people to pay for them and everything, were super heteronormative and did not know how to handle domestic violence when it was between people that somebody is a member of the queer community. It was incredibly traditional and really only viewed women are always victims and men are always perpetrator. And it was very problematic. So I refused to offer any sort of court program for LGBTQ cases. And instead, I found a community-based nonprofit that provided services to the LGBTQ community who happened to have a program where people met every single week to talk about safety in relationships. But that community-based alternative was a community-based organization that worked with the LGBTQ community. Excuse me, I say queer because I identify as queer, but I'm not, proposing that other people use that language from outside the community. So, I referred them to an organization that specialized in that community, was from that community, that had other services, help people with housing, help people with whatever other stuff that they needed help with as an alternative. And it didn't really require anything out of me, except I just, made sure the court and everybody knew why I was doing that. And I had the approval within my office to do it because I had, the evidence to support how the programs were useless that the court was offering for that population of people. And I have advanced peace on here because I do think it's really important to draw a distinction. Advanced peace is a violence intervention prevention program, right? Some community-based programs can have violence interrupters in them. However, for advanced peace, the way that program works is that it's separate from the DA, it's separate from the prosecutor's office. They're not holding circle necessarily for people who have cases, and Carol can refer cases to them of violence after it happens. This is a community-based, or however it's structured, but it's a mayoral program to help deal with conflict resolution inside of communities before or as it happens. If there's a case of violence that goes to Carol's office, as the way things are right now, right, first of all, there is no diversion for any sort of assaultive crimes. So it wouldn't be eligible for diversion, but let's say there even was, it wouldn't necessarily, under the way that things are structured right now, it wouldn't go to advanced peace because that's just not how it's structured right now. Advanced peace is just its own separate program. And I think it's really important to have prosecutors who support programs like advanced peace because, there could be a lot of stuff going on that by the time it gets to the prosecutor's office, it's after the fact, and having some programs that can be a little bit more preventative or interventionist, right? Like advanced peace can avoid those cases going to the office, can avoid situations where people are getting arrested and then that case goes to Carol's office. So I hope that distinction kind of makes sense. Different offices engage with diversionary programs in the ways based on the laws and based on how things work locally in that county and based on what's available. So in this case, Raja denies diversion. I moved diversion up before bail, but we will discuss bail in a second. He was excluded because he had a previous conviction, which is very common for people that get excluded from diversion programs based on their criminal history. So this is going to be a breath, but I want to get through the rest of the information. So please put questions in the chat, and we can figure out how to answer those questions, and I'll put my information in the chat as well when we're completed. So someone's going to be charged. Let's say if the police keep them in custody in Ingham County, the police can charge you with something, fill out paperwork and let you go, and then submit paperwork to Carol's office to press charges, or the police can hold on to you and you can be in custody, not be allowed to go free. And the police can send their paperwork to Carol's office, and Carol's office reviews it much more quickly within 24 hours. I think there is a constitutional right to speedy trial. So there are laws around how long somebody's allowed to be held in custody before finding out what the actual charges are against them. I think the national law is 48 hours. But Carol described that they were like closer to, the average time is usually about within a day. But I think that could also depend on, the court's capacity. Is it a holiday? I know out in New York, even though our law is 24 hours, if it's on a weekend and it's a Friday, and especially if it's a holiday weekend and or Monday, the courts are closed because of a holiday, people could be sitting in from Friday all the way to Monday or Tuesday, even though it's technically against the law for that to happen. So, the time between charging and a decision about whether bail is going to be set can be a few days. The legal basis for bail in New York is whether or not in Michigan is whether or not a person is likely to appear, and based on public safety. And so Michigan uses a risk assessment tool that looks at criminal history, how long have they been living at their residence, what's their employment, also what are their charges, like I said, criminal history, have they ever not appeared to court before, those sort of things. Now, this is an important question about bias playing a role in bail determinations. There's a national conversation, right, over how it's unfair for people to be held in on bail when they simply can't afford to pay. So as a result, there has been legislation all across the country saying that we should have no cash bail options, because if there's cash bail, that means somebody has to be paying to get out. And it's not fair if somebody simply can't pay to get out. So what does that leave us? That would leave either a bond, either you're held in or you're released. And there may be some space in between, right? You might be released with conditions to have to, report to somebody. There could, in some jurisdictions, there's intermediary sort of organizations that will say, fine, instead of keeping them in, let them out, and we'll watch them. We'll have them report to us, we'll have them call to us, we'll double check them, make sure that they're showing up to the next court dates. We'll make sure that we'll require them to come into our office, for example. And if they don't do those things, we'll let you know, and a warrant would likely then be issued. But this is a huge issue, because as long as we're assessing people for risk to community, what does risk to community look like? What does public safety look like? We know that this is an incredibly racialized determination. As long as we live in a country that was built off of, slavery, we all know that our society that we live in a society where Blackness is associated with dangerousness, right? And we're dealing with colorism. There's studies that show that folks with darker skin get, treated disproportionately worse than people with lighter skin. There's plenty of anecdotal conversations and evidence about this within our own communities. So this is why bail is very tricky, because even if we get rid of no cash bail, we are still making determinations over who's allowed to live in community and who is not. And as long as that is the determination, no matter what factors we use, my theory is you can never erase racial discrimination within that because of the close association between dangerousness and Blackness. So there are other ways and ways to be thinking about bail. There are ways to be thinking about, how do we build in safety in communities? And some would argue that we should be assessing, instead of risk, we should be assessing for what support does this person need in order to live safely in community. And that is actually mentioned in a book by Danielle Sered that I can put in the chat later as well. But, we have to think about, we all have to think about what bail means to us and what is safety in our communities. What do we want safety in our communities to look like if somebody gets arrested for something? How do we want to make a determination as to who's allowed to stay in community and who's not? So how do prosecutors influence bail? Well, since prosecutors have the power to determine the charges, that means that they're determining the top charge. So the seriousness of the charge is what a judge is going to look at. Judge is going to look at criminal history. Judge is going to look at, what are some of the factors going on here. And so I will say that in Ingham County, Carol's office doesn't appear in front of the judge at the time that bail is being determined. They're not physically there. They'll fill out a worksheet ahead of time, or a piece, and that worksheet will provide certain information. If they're asking for bail, whether they're asking for bail will be included in that, because they won't always ask for bail, but in cases of domestic violence, cases of violence, bail is still probably going to be asked for. But they'll fill out a worksheet saying, bail, whether or not bail should be issued, what are the considerations that they want. And generally, this is a general statistic, judges usually agree with prosecutors about 90% of the time. So, like I said, in Ingham, they'll present their written recommendations for certain cases like domestic violence or carrying a concealed weapon. And they'll consider their own criteria around criminal history and what they view to be the potential threat to the victim if there's a victim in that case. The office does have, a policy to discourage requesting for cash bail and are more likely to request conditions, right? So I said, can be released and have to abide by certain conditions. Some conditions include tethering, other conditions, and the conditions can include additional fines and fees. So what could happen here? Raja could be released without having to pay money bail. Raja can be released with certain conditions. Raja could be released and have to pay money in order to be released, or Raja may not be released, not be approved to be released, and will have to stay in jail with no bond, with no cash bail option. So in this case, the judge sets $20,000 bail because the way that we're looking at this from the most serious way, it could be considered a felony. Raja doesn't have the money to pay that. Mother also is dealing with medical bills. So now Raja's staying in jail during the pendency of this case. Now Raja does have a right to a speedy trial, right? That's why, since they were being held in custody, the judge had to see them within, I think, 48 hours, but usually a little bit less. The speedy trial right just means that people have a right for their case to not last forever, right? So, for a felony, it's supposed to be 6 months. For a misdemeanor case, it's 28 days, but there's a lot of exceptions as to what counts towards what equals up to that 6 months. There are time periods that are exceptions to that rule, and that is why people's cases can last years, because there can be exceptions to all of these rules. It's never just 6 months from the point of arrest and being in custody to the end. Could be shorter if they take a plea. It could very easily take longer. Like I said, there's a lot of exceptions to what counts during that time, and Raja will be in jail during that entire time. Unless they make bail or unless bail conditions are revisited. Bail conditions can be revisited at any point during the case. Usually has to be for some particular reason. You know, you can argue that the strength of the case has changed and therefore it's not as serious, blah, blah, blah. You know, you should lower bail, or et cetera. Like there could be arguments throughout the pendency of the case, throughout the time of the case, that like somebody bail conditions should change, they should be released. So at least they're fighting the case from the outside and not having to sit in while that stuff is happening. So that's also a possibility, but this is how people's cases last a long time because there's exceptions. Breathe. Discovery and pleas. This is like, now you're in jail or now you have a case, and what happens now? What's going on? Well, during this period, a prosecutor has to give their information to the defense attorney. The person who is being charged has a right to know how strong of a case the prosecutor has against them. However, who has all the evidence? Who has the ability to give it to the defense attorney? Because the defense attorney can't get it from anybody else but the prosecutor, really, is the prosecutor. So even though the prosecutor has an obligation to give information to the defense attorney, an obligation to give, even more importantly, any information that could help the person who's accused, they're the ones that are kind of in control as to when they get it. So that part is very tricky. It's dependent on resources, it's dependent on priorities, it's dependent on, you know, the judge and the way that the office handles this. There aren't that many requirements around time periods of how soon the prosecutor has to give this information. And prosecutors have to give information, not only the evidence that they have, but any evidence that they continue to collect during the course of the case, any evidence that they find out about, any information that they find out about that can help the accused case, right? But this will include a lot more than just video, surveillance video, and medical records. This can include somebody's social media, somebody's entire Facebook page. I used to put pauses. If I knew a person's Facebook handle, my job instructed me to, there is actually a mechanism through Facebook where I would send a request to Facebook for Facebook to save that person's profile and everything in that person's profile until I can follow up with a search warrant to get that information or a permission to get that information, even if that person was to then delete their account. So if somebody, and that information can be used in the case against them. And I remember I did that once on a statutory rape case where the person just posted a photo of him making out with the mother of his child when she was like 14 years old. And so I was able to use their Facebook posts or Instagram posts, Facebook Lives, all that stuff. This also includes whenever the police might take somebody's cell phone. And if we can get a search warrant on somebody's cell phone, we're going inside their cell phone, we're going to be able to get all that information too. So the prosecutor has a duty to provide this information, but most jurisdictions do not have set time periods of when this stuff has to be given over. And the reason why this is important, I'm actually going to skip over this a little bit because I want to connect this to pleas. The reason why this is important is because a defense attorney needs to know as much of this information as possible so that they can properly advise their client over whether or not they should take a particular plea. So that's why I kind of have pleas and discovery hand in hand, because a prosecutor can make an offer for a plea, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but they can make that offer for a plea at any point during the case. But it's important for that to be done in conjunction with the defense attorney having all the information that they need in order to properly advise their client as to how strong of the case this is and whether or not it's worth the risk going to trial.
So Jack, we have a question here. Hey,
yes.
Jack, we have a question here about the time. So in Ingham County, is there a specific time that the prosecutor has to turn all of the information over, or does it come in a sprinkle? Like, what's the time?
So Jack, I'm going to try to answer that. So Michigan law requires that discovery is an ongoing process. As soon as the attorney files his or her appearance, which is they're saying I'm the attorney on the case, we have to turn over what do we have at that point. Now that wasn't true in New York, for example, when Jack was prosecuting. They changed their discovery laws recently. It's an ongoing obligation because sometimes we don't get things right away, like medical records, mental health records, videos, lab reports, things like that. So it's an ongoing one. And, you know, and there's an ethical obligation for us. If someone doesn't turn it over, we could be actually referred to the Attorney Grievance Commission. So we have a discovery unit, and as soon as something comes in, it's scanned into our discovery system, and it is then sent to the, it's either, depending on how it's done, it might be a link to like evidence.com for body cam videos, or it might be a physical copy or a CD. So if a child's interviewed at Small Talk, for example, it might be a DVD of the interview, things like that. But it's not a magic time, except we give you everything we have at the time that the appearance is filed, but then it's a continuing, it's like once we get it, and sometimes that takes a few days to scan it in and things, but as soon as we get it, we have to turn it over.
So Jack, I mean, we got questions that are on the board here. We're gonna stick a pin. If you could mark this point in the presentation, and we pick up on part 2, so we find out what happens to Raja like at the end. But if we could stick a pin in it right here, and we've got folks that are live, like, or in person rather. I'd like to give them the opportunity to just kind of talk amongst yourselves, like what are some of your other questions? Like, what did you hear as we've been having this conversation about public safety, you know, investing in community and other options, and I mean, this whole discussion on diversion, and I mean, just so I think we need a few moments to really unpack what you brilliantly presented, and we also want to make sure that we give the folks online the opportunity. So if you could like stop share, and I'm going to ask Sarah if she could kind of facilitate this, because I don't think you all can see me. If I can move over to the camera, boom, there I am. And so if the folks that are online, so can you give us some final reactions? We got 5 minutes before we have to go. I mean, Jack, like my mind is spinning right now, right? And with 1,000 questions. So what about the folks online? I just want to make sure that we lift up the voices of those that are joining us in the Zoom. Anyone that's in the Zoom would like to take your camera or unmute yourself and give us some final reactions before we head off and give some final announcements. Yeah, go ahead. I see you. Is there anyone? Judy, I saw you came off mute for a hot second. I don't know if that was an accident. Okay, hi. All right, so anyone here would like to have any final reactions? It's just, okay. Come step right into the microphone.
So I'm wondering, I feel like I might already know the answer, but I just want to confirm. So I was going to court with somebody, but they had a different thing going on, and it was the style where like everybody's waiting to see the judge, and they brought in a man that had been picked up Friday night for having his license plates weren't renewed, and they kept him in the jail until that Monday. Is there anything that the prosecutor can do, or is it just like, oh, we're closed, so we can't help, like the whole weekend? Because that could make somebody lose their job, or just plenty of other things that's wrong with that. Can the prosecutor do anything about it, or do they have to wait until they're in office?
So that was one of our questions, and we're going to mark that and get to it.
I can answer that quickly.
Yeah.
I can answer that quickly. And the office has prosecutors that are available to, it's an issue of resources as to why it takes so long sometimes for somebody in custody to then be seen. So prosecutors are available to be reviewing cases. The court is open even on weekends to be reviewing cases for arraignments, for example, for somebody to be heard. It's a matter of how many people are in the system and how quickly can they be reviewed. It's not so much that the court is not open and that prosecutors aren't reviewing it. I remember being there until like 2 a.m. Processing cases. So I'm sure it's like some periods of time, like very small periods of time in which the court is closed, but they're open over the weekends to be processing people. I think it's just it's a resources issue.
Got it.
And I hope that should be accurate.
Mordecai?
Carol.
Yes, go ahead, Peggy. Thank you, Jack. Peggy?
I don't have a particular question, but I do want to comment that how lucky we are in Ingham County to have a prosecutor who will sit through these conversations and let her thoughts be known, both through policy changes as well as being available to answer these questions. So I think we ought to be incredibly grateful.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Especially given the disparities, right? I mean, my goodness. Anyone else on? Sir, can you put the slide up, right? We got a couple quick announcements, and then I'm gonna let the folks that are here at One Love, I want you to ask your question so we can get it on, like record it, and then we'll go from there. We have everybody go, we're like almost at.
All right, quick question. What can you do, Carol, specifically to implement more policies around discretion? What communities they specifically affect in your term in office? And are you promising to the community that you will work the best that you possibly can to make these things happen? And should we even trust you if you can't?
Wow, and I'm not supposed to answer that, we're just recording it, right?
Yes.
Okay, we'll save that question.
We're gonna save that question so that she don't end up in jail and she's not here for the next session, you understand? No, I'm joking, but we're gonna save that question because literally, I mean, we are a part of the community. And when we look at those numbers up there, we're the ones that are disproportionately impacted, right? So obviously, how we are seen is totally different, right? And so I have 1,000 of questions around all of those issues. But here's the deal, folks. August 11th, now this is different because, right, August 11th. Yeah, August 11th, I want to make sure we got this right, Sarah. August 11th, the Power of Prosecutors, Part 2.
Is that during the day though? I thought it was at night.
Do we have this time? Absolutely. So we want to make sure.
It is 6 p.m. Yeah, 6 to 8. So we'll update that. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, 6 to 8. So that's 6 to 8 because more people are more available in the evening. So that's Wednesday, August 11th, 6 to 8. We're going to do part 2. Part 2, right? We want to find out what happens in this case. But what we're asking you to do is to come with more questions. Come with more questions. I see all kinds of community leaders that are here in the Zoom. So thank you for being here today. Do we have any other final announcement? Yeah, and so applications for Independent Community Police Oversight Commission extended until Friday, August 6th. It is a priority to have people on this commission who represent communities who are most affected by policing. Up to 2 or of the 11 members of the commission may be non-residents of East Lansing, and the link to the media release on the City of East Lansing homepage with the information about how you can access the application. Listen, we want to thank you for being a part of today's People's Assembly, and thank all of our sponsors. And let's give Jack a hand for the presentation. Andrew. So they're loving you and here. And so again, we thank you. We're looking forward to part 2. And as you know, we have Freedom Summer every summer, right? And so we have our youth. So they're giving a shout out. We've got our One Love. No justice, no peace. They're honking the horns out here, right? And so again, you see the announcement that's on the screen. Join us August 4th from 1 to 3 with the Youth Town Hall. You don't want to miss. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank all of you all who are joining us via as we push live to Facebook. Thank you again, and we'll see you for part 2. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.